History pivots on singular moments, decisions that reshape destinies. For the Galactic Empire, for Darth Vader, for the entire galaxy, one such moment came aboard the second Death Star, high above the forest moon of Endor. But what if that moment had unfolded differently? What if the Dark Lord of the Sith had not redeemed himself as Anakin Skywalker, but instead seized ultimate power for himself? The question isn't whether Vader wanted to rule. He did. From the moment he pledged himself to Darth Sidious in Palpatine's chambers, from the ashes of the Jedi Temple to the volcanic hellscape of Mustafar, Vader had harbored ambitions of galactic dominion. He had told Padme on Mustafar that together they could overthrow Palpatine and rule the galaxy. He had whispered the same promise to Luke on Cloud City. The desire for power wasn't new. What was always missing was the opportunity, the perfect convergence of circumstances that would allow Vader to strike. In the throne room of the Death Star, that opportunity presented itself. Emperor Palpatine, consumed by his own hubris and the intoxicating pleasure of torturing Luke Skywalker with Force lightning, left himself vulnerable. The Emperor believed himself invincible, believed that Vader's will was so thoroughly broken, his spirit so completely crushed by decades of manipulation and torment, that the Dark Lord would never dare betray him. Palpatine had spent years cultivating Vader's hatred, feeding on it like a parasite, drawing strength from his apprentice's pain and rage. The Emperor thought he had created the perfect servant, a weapon without ambition of its own. He was wrong, but in our timeline, Vader chose differently. He chose love over power, redemption over domination. He saved his son and destroyed his master, dying in the process and bringing balance to the Force. Yet the Sith teachings had always been clear. The apprentice must eventually overthrow the master. It was the fundamental principle of the rule of two, established by Darth Bane 1,000 years before. Every Sith apprentice was expected to surpass their master and claim their place. Palpatine himself had killed his own master, Darth Plagueis, in his sleep, seizing power when the opportunity arose. What if Vader had stayed true to the Sith way? What if, instead of redemption, he chose power? Picture the scene differently. Palpatine unleashes his lightning upon Luke, cackling with sadistic glee as the young Jedi writhes in agony. Vader watches, and yes, something stirs in what remains of Anakin Skywalker's heart. He sees his son suffering. He feels the pull toward the light, the whisper of redemption. But then another thought crystallizes in his mechanical mind. This is the moment. Not to save Luke by destroying Palpatine, but to save Luke by replacing him. To end the Emperor's reign and begin his own. Vader doesn't call out to his master. He doesn't broadcast his intentions. Instead, he does what Sith do best. He strikes from the shadows, swift and merciless. His massive hands close around Palpatine's throat before the Emperor can react. The lightning intensifies, surging through Vader's cybernetic body, frying circuits and melting components. But Vader doesn't let go. He channels his pain into strength, his suffering into power. Just as the dark side demands. The Force roars around them as master and apprentice engage in a final desperate struggle. Palpatine is powerful, perhaps the most powerful Sith Lord in 1,000 years. His mastery of the dark side is profound, his knowledge vast. But he's old, and he's caught off guard, and Vader is fueled by decades of hatred that Palpatine himself cultivated. Every manipulation, every degradation, every moment of torment, that the Emperor inflicted upon his apprentice now becomes fuel for Vader's attack. The Emperor fights back with every technique in his arsenal. Force lightning intensifies to levels that would reduce a normal being to ash. Telekinetic waves crash against Vader's armored form. Sith alchemy twists the space around them, but Vader endures. His suit is being destroyed, yes. His life support is failing, but he's accepted that cost. He's been living in a prison of metal and pain for over 2 decades. Death might be a mercy, but power would make it all worthwhile. Through the Force, he feels Luke watching, feels his son's horror and confusion. Good. Let the boy see what true Sith strength looks like. Let him understand the price of power and the inevitability of the strong dominating the weak. With a final surge of dark side energy, Vader lifts the Emperor and hurls him into the throne room's reactor shaft. Just as in the original timeline, Palpatine falls, his screams echoing through the chamber, but this time, it's not a redeemed father saving his son. It's an ambitious Sith Lord claiming what he believes is rightfully his. Vader staggers, his damaged suit sparking and hissing. His respirator functions intermittently, but he's alive. More importantly, he's victorious. Luke rushes to his fallen father, but Vader raises a hand, halting him. Through the failing vocoder, Vader's voice emerges, distorted and weak, but unmistakably commanding. He doesn't ask Luke to remove his mask. He doesn't seek reconciliation. Instead, he issues an order. The Death Star's communication systems still function, and Vader uses them. Throughout the battle station, throughout the Imperial fleet locked in combat with the Rebel Alliance, a message broadcasts. The Emperor is dead. Long live the Emperor. Darth Vader has claimed the throne. The galaxy would never be the same. The power vacuum and immediate aftermath. The death of Emperor Palpatine sent shockwaves through the Force itself. Every Force-sensitive being in the galaxy felt it. A disturbance like the snapping of a great chain that had bound the galaxy for decades. For the inquisitorious, the few who remained after years of attrition, the sensation was particularly acute. Their connection to the Emperor, forged through dark side rituals and sustained by his overwhelming presence, suddenly severed. Some went mad. Others fled into hiding. A few sensed the new dark power that had replaced the old and began their journey to pay homage to the new master. Aboard the Executor, Vader's personal superstar destroyer, Admiral Piet received the transmission with a mixture of shock and calculated pragmatism. Piet had served under Vader for years, had witnessed the Dark Lord's ruthlessness firsthand, had seen what happened to officers who failed or questioned orders. The Admiral knew that this moment was both extremely dangerous and potentially opportune. He could declare the transmission a rebel trick, rally the fleet to avenge the Emperor, and possibly become a hero of the Empire. Or he could accept the reality before him and secure his position under the new regime. Piet chose survival. Within minutes, the Executor signaled its acceptance of Vader's claim. The other Star Destroyers and Death Squadron followed their flagship's lead. The message rippled through the Imperial Navy vessels at Endor. Some captains hesitated, some questioned, but most fell in line. They had been conditioned for years to follow Vader's orders without question, to fear his presence, to recognize his authority as second only to the Emperor himself. If Vader claimed he was now the Emperor, who among them had the power to contradict him? The Rebel Alliance, monitoring Imperial communications from their ships, learned of the development with profound confusion and concern. Admiral Akbar, leading the Alliance fleet, faced an impossible tactical situation. They had come to Endor to destroy the Death Star and, if possible, eliminate the Emperor. The space station remained intact, its superlaser operational, though the shield generator on the forest moon had been destroyed. Now they faced not just the Imperial fleet, but the possibility that the most feared military commander in the galaxy had just claimed supreme power. Mon Mothma, listening to the reports from her command center, felt her blood run cold. Palpatine had been a politician, a schemer who operated through intermediaries and manipulations. Vader was a warrior, a frontline combat commander who led from the vanguard. An empire led by Vader would be fundamentally different, potentially even more dangerous in certain respects. The Alliance had intelligence networks throughout Imperial territory, connections with sympathetic governors and officers who quietly undermined Palpatine's regime. Would those networks survive under Vader's rule? Would the political landscape that had allowed the rebellion to grow even exist under a force-wielding military dictator? Luke Skywalker, still standing in the throne room with his father, faced the most personal crisis. He had felt the light in Vader, had believed in his father's redemption. And now, Vader had struck down the Emperor, yes, but not out of love, out of ambition, out of a desire for power. Luke ignited his lightsaber, green blade humming in the charged air. He wouldn't strike his father down, not without provocation, but he wouldn't submit either. Vader regarded his son through the dark lenses of his mask, and for a long moment neither spoke. Then Vader extended his hand, not in supplication or affection, but in offer. "Join me, Luke. With the Emperor dead, the galaxy is ours to reshape. No more secrecy, no more hiding our power. We will bring order through strength, peace through power. Together, as father and son, we will end this destructive conflict and rule as the Sith were meant to rule." Luke shook his head. "You haven't changed. You've only traded one master for the absence of one. You're still a slave to the dark side." "I am free," Vader corrected, his voice gaining strength as his suit's backup systems engaged. "For the first time in decades, I am truly free. Palpatine controlled me through fear and manipulation. I have broken that control. I have claimed my destiny. The question now is whether you will join me or oppose me. Choose carefully, my son. I would prefer to have you at my side, but I will rule this galaxy regardless of your decision." Before Luke could respond, the Death Star shuddered. The battle had continued to rage around them, and now rebel starfighters were targeting the battle station's reactor core, just as they had the first Death Star. Vader sensed the danger immediately. He had no intention of dying in the explosion of his first act as Emperor. Through the Force, he commanded the station's gunners to intensify their defensive fire, but it was too late. Wedge Antilles and Lando Calrissian in the Millennium Falcon had penetrated too deeply into the superstructure. Vader moved with surprising speed for someone whose suit had just been ravaged by Force lightning. He grabbed Luke's arm, not gently, and dragged him toward the throne room's exit. "We're leaving, now." Luke resisted, but Vader's strength, even damaged, exceeded his own. They raced through the corridors of the Death Star as explosions bloomed throughout its vast interior. Imperial officers and stormtroopers fled in panic, abandoning their posts, scrambling for escape pods and shuttle bays. Vader's personal shuttle awaited in his private hangar, guarded by a squad of his most loyal royal guards. These crimson-armored warriors had served Palpatine with absolute devotion, but they recognized power when they saw it, and Vader radiated dark side energy like a furnace radiates heat. As the shuttle launched, the Death Star began its death spiral. Secondary explosions cascaded through the superweapon structure. Vader, seated in the pilot's chair with Luke secured in the co-pilot's position, pushed the shuttle to its limits, racing away from the doomed station. Behind them, the second Death Star detonated in a spectacular fireball that would be visible from the surface of Endor's forest moon. The explosion claimed thousands of lives, Imperial and Rebel alike, and marked the end of Palpatine's last great project. But unlike in the original timeline, it didn't mark the end of the Empire, because Darth Vader lived, because the Dark Lord had seized power instead of finding redemption, and because the new Emperor had escaped to fight another day, to consolidate his position, to reshape the galaxy according to his vision of order through strength. Vader's ascension to Imperial throne. The first days after Endor were chaos. News of the Emperor's death spread like wildfire through Imperial territory, carried by official channels and underground networks alike. On 1,000 worlds, people reacted in 1,000 different ways. Some celebrated, seeing an opportunity for freedom. Others panicked, fearing the collapse of the only government they had known. Still others waited, calculating how this shift in power might benefit or harm their own interests. The imperial hierarchy found itself in unprecedented territory. Palpatine had deliberately avoided establishing a clear line of succession. He had intended to rule forever, sustained by Sith alchemy and dark side techniques. When death finally came, he had expected it to be at the hands of a properly trained and chosen successor, not in sudden violence aboard a doomed battle station. The result was that there were no official protocols, no laws or regulations governing what happened when the Emperor died without naming an heir. Grand Vizier Mas Amedda, who had served as Palpatine's public face in the Imperial Senate and bureaucracy, found himself nominally in charge of the government machinery on Coruscant. But Amedda was a politician, not a warrior, and he understood the fundamental truth of imperial power. It flowed from force of arms, not bureaucratic legitimacy. The military controlled the empire, and whoever commanded the military's loyalty would be the true master of the galaxy. In the hours after Endor, Vader made his position clear. From the Executor, which had survived the battle and now served as his mobile throne room, he issued proclamations to every sector fleet, every army garrison, every imperial installation. The Emperor was dead, killed in battle against rebel terrorists who had infiltrated the Death Star. In the chaos of that battle, Lord Vader, Supreme Commander of the Imperial forces, had assumed emergency powers to maintain order and prevent the Empire from fracturing into warring factions. The language was carefully chosen. Vader didn't claim the title of Emperor immediately. That would come later, after his position was secured. For now, he presented himself as a military leader, stepping in to prevent disaster, a loyal servant preserving the empire that Palpatine had built. It was a fiction, but a useful one. It gave wavering officers and politicians a framework to accept his authority without immediately committing treason against their oaths to the Empire. The Moffs, Those regional governors who controlled vast territories and commanded significant military forces became the key to Vader's consolidation of power. Some Moffs were true believers in the Empire's ideology. Others were opportunists who had used their positions to enrich themselves. All of them now faced a choice: accept Vader's authority or resist it. Most chose acceptance, at least outwardly. They had seen what Vader did to those who failed or opposed him. The man force-choked admirals to death for tactical mistakes. What would he do to a Moff who openly challenged his claim to supreme power? Grand Moff Bertroff Hissa, an ambitious and cunning leader who controlled several wealthy sectors in the core worlds, attempted to play both sides. He sent messages of support to Vader while simultaneously reaching out to other Moffs, proposing they form a governing council to collectively rule the Empire. It was, he argued, what Palpatine would have wanted: a council of the Empire's most powerful leaders, working together to preserve stability. Vader's response was swift and brutal. He dispatched a Star Destroyer to Hissa's headquarters with a single squad of stormtroopers. The troops delivered a message: present yourself aboard the Executor within 24 hours, or be declared a traitor to the Empire. Hissa, recognizing he didn't have the military strength to resist, complied. When he arrived on the Executor, Vader greeted him personally in a private chamber. What transpired in that meeting remained known only to Vader and Hissa. But when the Grand Moff emerged, his face was ashen, and he walked with a pronounced limp. He immediately transmitted a message to his fellow Moffs, pledging absolute loyalty to Lord Vader and urging them to do the same. Whatever Vader had done or threatened in that chamber had convinced one of the Empire's most ambitious leaders that resistance was futile and submission was survival. The Grand Admirals, the 12 most senior naval commanders in the Empire, presented a more complex challenge. These were not politicians, but military professionals, many of them brilliant strategists and combat commanders in their own right. Grand Admiral Thrawn, perhaps the most capable of them all, had been missing for years, pulled into the unknown regions by circumstances beyond the Empire's control. Of the remaining Grand Admirals, 4 had died at Endor when the Executor's sister ship, the Superstar Destroyer Lusankya, had been destroyed in the battle. The surviving Grand Admirals each commanded vast fleets and held tremendous influence within the Imperial Navy. They could have resisted Vader's claim, could have triggered a civil war that would tear the Empire apart. But Vader understood military men. He understood chains of command, honor, duty, and the practical realities of power. He didn't threaten them. He didn't need to. Instead, he met with each Grand Admiral individually, either in person or through holographic communication, and made his case. He reminded them that he had commanded Imperial forces since the Empire's founding. He had led the assault on the Jedi Temple. He had hunted down and eliminated the surviving Jedi Knights. He had commanded Death Squadron, the Empire's most elite fleet, for years. He had been Supreme Commander in all but name under Palpatine. Now, with the Emperor dead, Order demanded clear leadership. The military needed a commander who understood warfare, who had proven himself in countless battles. The Empire needed strength, not bureaucratic committees or political maneuvering. To Grand Admiral Donitz, commander of the Third Fleet, Vader made an additional appeal. He promised the Navy would take precedence in the new order. No more would resources be diverted to vanity projects like the Death Star. The Navy would be the primary instrument of imperial power, its admirals respected and empowered. Donitz, a career naval officer who had bristled under Palpatine's tendency to override military judgment with political considerations, found this argument compelling. One by one, the Grand Admirals signaled their acceptance. Some were genuine in their support. Others were simply waiting for a better opportunity to make their own moves. But for now, the unified command structure held. The Imperial Navy, the most powerful military force in the galaxy, acknowledged Vader's authority. With the military secured, Vader turned his attention to the symbols and ceremonies of power. 3 weeks after Endor, he traveled to Coruscant for the first time as the Empire's supreme leader. The capital world buzzed with tension and speculation. Would there be a formal coronation? Would Vader claim the title of Emperor, or would he maintain the fiction of being a temporary military governor? Vader ended the speculation by summoning the Imperial Ruling Council and what remained of the Imperial Senate to a special session in the Senate building. The chamber, which had once been the heart of the Galactic Republic's democracy, had become a hollow shell under Palpatine's rule. Senators had no real power, serving merely as figureheads while Moffs and military commanders made actual decisions. But the institution still existed, still provided a veneer of legitimacy to imperial rule. Vader entered the Senate chamber in full armor, his black cape flowing behind him, his respirator's rhythmic breathing echoing through the vast space. Every eye fixed upon him. He made no speeches about democracy or the will of the people. Such pretenses might have served Palpatine's rise to power, but Vader had no need for them. He stood before the assembled senators and council members and stated simple facts. The Emperor was dead. The Empire required leadership. The military had chosen him. The Moffs had accepted his authority. The bureaucracy functioned under his command. He was, in all meaningful ways, already the Emperor. This session existed merely to formalize what reality had already established. The Senate would vote to grant him the title and full imperial authority, or it would be dissolved and replaced with a military governance council. The choice was theirs, but the outcome would be the same regardless. It wasn't a speech designed to inspire or persuade. It was a statement of power. And the Senate, reading the situation correctly, voted almost unanimously to proclaim Vader as Emperor. The few dissenters were quietly noted by Imperial intelligence for future monitoring. Within hours, the news broadcast across the HoloNet. Darth Vader, Dark Lord of the Sith, Supreme Commander of the Imperial Forces, was now Emperor Vader, absolute ruler of the Galactic Empire. The coronation ceremony, held days later in the Imperial Palace, was unlike anything the galaxy had seen. Where Palpatine's rise had been wrapped in political theater and pseudo-democratic processes, Vader's ascension was brutally honest. There were no pretenses about serving the people or preserving Republic traditions. The ceremony was Sith in nature, dark side energy crackling through the Force as Vader formally claimed his throne. The Emperor's throne room, which had previously been aboard the Death Star, was now relocated to the Imperial Palace on Coruscant. But Vader made a significant change. He ordered a second throne room constructed on Mustafar, within Fortress Vader. The dark side vergence that flowed beneath his castle would serve as a wellspring of power, a place where he could channel the Force with unprecedented intensity. He would rule from Coruscant when necessary, dealing with the administrative functions of empire. But Mustafar would be his true seat of power, the dark heart of his regime. Luke Skywalker, who had remained in Imperial custody since Endor, watched these events unfold with growing despair. Vader had not tortured him or attempted to force his conversion through pain. Instead, the new Emperor kept his son close, treating him more like a guest than a prisoner. They took meals together in Vader's private chambers. They discussed philosophy, politics, the nature of the Force. Vader wanted Luke to come to the dark side willingly, to see the logic and necessity of strong rule, to embrace his heritage as a Sith Lord's son. But Luke resisted. He reached out through the Force to Leia, his twin sister, hoping to coordinate some kind of rescue or resistance. What he discovered shook him to his core. Leia could feel his presence, could sense his location and emotional state, but she was with the Rebel Alliance, which had fled Endor and scattered across the galaxy. They were organizing, regrouping, trying to understand what this new empire under Vader would mean for their cause. They couldn't mount a rescue operation, not yet. Luke was on his own, trapped in the heart of the Empire, facing a father who claimed to love him while actively trying to corrupt him. The stage was set. Emperor Vader sat upon his throne, Dark Lord of the most powerful military force the galaxy had ever known. The Rebel Alliance, shocked by this turn of events, scrambled to adapt their strategy. The Imperial military machine, always efficient under Vader's command, now operated without the political intrigues and manipulations that had characterized Palpatine's reign. And somewhere in the shadows, other powers began to move, sensing opportunity in the transition of power. The galaxy had entered a new chapter in its history, an empire ruled not by cunning and manipulation, but by force and fear given physical form, Darth Vader's empire. And it would reshape everything. What if Darth Vader became Emperor? Part 2. Imperial Restructuring under Emperor Vader. Emperor Vader wasted no time implementing his vision for the Galactic Empire. Within the first month of his reign, he initiated sweeping reforms that would fundamentally alter how the Empire functioned. Unlike Palpatine, who had maintained countless competing bureaucracies and encouraged infighting among his subordinates as a means of control, Vader sought efficiency and clarity of command. He was, at his core, a military man who understood hierarchies, chains of command, and the importance of clear objectives. The first major restructuring came to the Imperial military itself. Vader abolished the distinction between the Imperial Army and Imperial Navy as separate and often competing services. Instead, he created unified sector commands, each led by a supreme commander who held authority over all military assets within their designated territory. These supreme commanders reported directly to the Emperor, cutting through layers of bureaucracy that had previously slowed decision-making and allowed for political maneuvering. Admiral Piet, who had proven his loyalty at Endor and in the crucial days that followed, was promoted to Supreme Commander of the Core Worlds, one of the most prestigious and powerful positions in the new military structure. Grand Admiral Donitz received command of the Outer Rim territories, tasked with hunting down rebel cells and securing the Empire's borders. These appointments sent a clear message: competence and loyalty would be rewarded, regardless of political connections or aristocratic lineage. The Death Star program, Palpatine's obsession, was immediately terminated. Vader had always considered the battle stations to be resource sinks, technological terrors that diverted materials and personnel from more practical military applications. The incomplete third Death Star, which had been in the early stages of construction in orbit around the Imperial world of Scarif, was dismantled. Its kyber crystals were redistributed to research facilities working on more efficient turbo-laser designs. The vast quantity of durasteel and other construction materials went to shipyards building star destroyers and support vessels. In place of superweapons, Vader emphasized force projection through fleets and ground forces. He ordered the construction of 50 new Imperial-class star destroyers, along with hundreds of smaller vessels. He expanded the Stormtrooper Corps, improving their training regimens and equipment. Where Palpatine had often relied on fear and overwhelming displays of power, Vader believed in having the actual military might to back up that fear. The Empire would be strong because its military was strong, not because it possessed a handful of planet-destroying weapons. The Imperial bureaucracy underwent equally dramatic changes. Vader had no patience for the corruption and inefficiency that had plagued Palpatine's administration. He established the Office of Imperial Oversight, staffed by former military officers and administrators with proven records of competence. This office had sweeping authority to investigate any Imperial official, from the lowest clerk to the highest Moff, for corruption, incompetence, or disloyalty. The first major target of the Office of Imperial Oversight was Moff Pandion, who governed a wealthy sector in the Mid-Rim. Pandion had grown obscenely rich during his tenure, skimming credits from taxation and accepting bribes from corporations seeking favorable treatment. Under Palpatine, such corruption had been tolerated as long as the Moff maintained order and delivered resources to Coruscant. Under Vader, it became a death sentence. Pandion was arrested, tried in a military tribunal, and executed within 2 weeks of Vader's ascension. His replacement, a former Imperial Army general named Arlen Vex, was given explicit instructions: govern efficiently, root out corruption, and ensure the sector's resources flowed to the Imperial military machine. Vex proved capable, increasing the sector's economic output while simultaneously reducing the tax burden on its citizens. Word of this spread quickly, and other Moffs began cleaning up their operations, hoping to avoid Pandion's fate. The restructuring extended to the Empire's approach to Force-sensitive individuals. Under Palpatine, the Inquisitorius had hunted down Force users to eliminate potential threats to Sith dominance. Vader maintained this program, but with a crucial difference. Force sensitives who showed potential would be given a choice: join the Imperial Knights, a new organization Vader established, or be executed. There would be no independent Force users in Vader's empire, no Force traditions operating outside Imperial control. The Imperial Knights were not Jedi. Vader made that distinction absolutely clear. They would be trained in Force techniques, yes, but always in service to the Empire and the Emperor. They would not follow the Jedi code of selflessness and detachment. Instead, they would embrace passion and strength, but channel these emotions toward maintaining order and serving Imperial interests. They would be warriors, enforcers, extensions of the Emperor's will. The first class of Imperial Knights numbered only 12 individuals, Force sensitives captured from various worlds and brought to Mustafar for training. Vader personally oversaw their instruction, teaching them lightsaber combat, Force techniques, and the importance of discipline. Unlike the Inquisitors, who had been brutal but often incompetent Force users, the Imperial Knights would be elite warriors, capable of operating independently or as commanders of military units. This approach to Force users represented a significant departure from Sith tradition. The rule of two, which had governed the Sith for 1,000 years, dictated that there should be only two Sith at any time, a master and an apprentice. Vader was violating this rule by training multiple Force users. But Vader saw the rule of two as Palpatine's tool for maintaining control, not as a fundamental truth. He believed that the Sith philosophy of strength through passion and conflict could be channeled into a larger organization, creating a cadre of dark side warriors who served the Empire rather than competing for dominance. On Mustafar, Fortress Vader underwent massive expansion. What had been a personal retreat and meditation site became the center of Imperial power. Vader ordered the construction of training facilities for his Imperial Knights, research laboratories for dark side experiments, and massive communications arrays that would allow him to coordinate Imperial operations across the galaxy. The fortress, powered by the dark side virgins beneath it, became a nexus of malevolent energy visible in the Force from star systems away. The Emperor's daily routine reflected his priorities. He spent mornings in his Bacta tank on Mustafar, the healing fluids easing the constant pain of his damaged body. During these sessions, he meditated on the dark side, drawing power from the Virgins and planning his next moves. Afternoons were devoted to military planning, reviewing reports from Supreme Commanders, and issuing orders to Imperial forces. Evenings were spent training his Imperial Knights or engaged in one-on-one sessions with Luke, attempting to break down his son's resistance to the dark side. Luke remained the Emperor's most important project. Vader believed that if he could turn Luke, if he could make his son embrace the dark side and become his true apprentice, the Empire would be unstoppable. A father and son ruling together, both powerful in the Force, would establish a Sith dynasty that could last for generations. But Luke continued to resist, clinging to his Jedi training and his faith in the light side of the Force. The confrontations between father and son became philosophical debates as much as tests of wills. Vader would argue that the Jedi had failed the galaxy, that their rigid adherence to detachment and non-involvement had allowed corruption and injustice to flourish. He pointed to the Clone Wars, to the Jedi Council's inability to see Palpatine's manipulations, to their failure to maintain peace. He asked Luke what the Jedi had really accomplished besides maintaining a status quo that oppressed countless beings across the galaxy. Luke countered that the Jedi sought balance and harmony, that they protected the weak and defended justice. But Vader had ready answers. How many slaves had the Jedi freed? They had an army of clones, sentient beings bred for war, and the Jedi had used them without question. Where was the justice in that? The Jedi preached about serving others, yet they built a temple on Coruscant while children starved in the lower levels. They were hypocrites, Vader insisted, who cloaked their ineffectiveness in a high-minded philosophy. These arguments troubled Luke more than he wanted to admit. He had seen the flaws in the old Jedi Order through Yoda and Obi-Wan stories. He knew they had made mistakes, but that didn't mean the dark side was the answer. That didn't mean oppression and tyranny were preferable to flawed attempts at justice. Luke clung to these beliefs even as doubt crept into his mind, fostered by his father's relentless pressure. The Rebel Alliance's response. The Rebel Alliance faced its darkest hour since the destruction of the first Death Star. High above the planet Sullust, in a converted Mon Calamari cruiser that served as the temporary Alliance headquarters, the surviving leadership grappled with a crisis that threatened to tear their movement apart. The Emperor was dead, which should have been cause for celebration, but in his place stood Darth Vader, a military genius who inspired terror in a way that Palpatine's political machinations never could. Mon Mothma, her usually composed demeanor showing signs of strain, addressed the Alliance Council. Representatives from dozens of worlds filled the chamber, some in person, others appearing as holograms from their various hiding spots across the galaxy. The mood was tense, arguments breaking out even before the session officially began. Some delegates argued that Vader's ascension represented an opportunity. The Empire's transition of power would create instability they could exploit. Others insisted that Vader would be more dangerous than Palpatine, more direct in his approach to crushing the rebellion. General Medine, who had defected from Imperial service and brought valuable intelligence to the Alliance, offered his assessment. Vader's military reforms, which Imperial defectors were already reporting, would make the Empire more efficient and deadly. The corruption and infighting that had hampered Imperial operations under Palpatine were being ruthlessly eliminated. Within months, possibly weeks, the Empire would emerge as a more streamlined and dangerous war machine. The Alliance needed to act quickly or risk being overwhelmed. But act how? Admiral Akbar pointed out the brutal reality of their situation. The Alliance had suffered significant losses at Endor. They had destroyed the incomplete Death Star, yes, but they had lost nearly a third of their fleet in the process. Several capital ships had been destroyed, and many experienced pilots were dead. They had struck what they thought would be a decisive blow, eliminating both the Emperor and his superweapon. Instead, they had merely changed the nature of the threat they faced. Princess Leia Organa, still reeling from the revelation that Luke was her brother and Darth Vader was their father, provided crucial insight into Vader's thinking. She had interrogated Vader extensively in the past, most notably aboard the first Death Star. She understood how he thought, how he valued strength and order above all else. Vader wasn't a politician like Palpatine. He wouldn't waste time consolidating support through political maneuvering or maintaining useful fictions about democratic institutions. He would simply command and expect obedience. This directness, Leia argued, was both a strength and a weakness. Vader's regime would be more militarily effective, but it would also be more brittle. Palpatine had maintained power through a complex web of competing interests, playing factions against each other, ensuring no one group became powerful enough to challenge him. Vader seemed to be doing the opposite, centralizing power and demanding unified command. If the Alliance could fracture that unified command, could sow discord among Vader's newly empowered Supreme Commanders, they might create the kind of instability that would allow the rebellion to survive and eventually triumph. The question of Luke dominated much of the discussion. Leia could feel him through the Force, could sense that he was alive and on Coruscant, but she couldn't reach him more specifically than that. Every attempt to plan a rescue mission ran into impossible obstacles. Coruscant was the most heavily defended world in the galaxy. The Imperial Palace was a fortress within a fortress, and even if they could somehow extract Luke, they would be risking the Alliance's limited military resources on what might be a suicide mission. Leia wanted to try anyway. Luke was her brother, her family, the last connection she had to her parents besides Vader himself. But Mon Mothma counseled patience and strategic thinking. The Alliance couldn't afford to lose more assets in a rescue attempt. They needed to rebuild, to establish new bases, to recruit new fighters. Luke was a powerful Jedi, yes, but he was one man. The Alliance was a cause that transcended any individual. The debate grew heated. Some delegates supported Mothma's position, arguing that the Alliance's survival came first. Others sided with Leia, insisting that abandoning Luke would be a betrayal of everything the Alliance stood for. If they left one of their heroes in Vader's clutches, what message did that send to potential recruits? What did it say about the Alliance's commitment to its people? Han Solo, who had been rescued from Jabba the Hutt's palace just before the mission to Endor, cut through the arguments with characteristic bluntness. Luke had risked everything to save him from carbonite freezing. They all knew Luke would never abandon a comrade in danger. If the Alliance left Luke to rot in Imperial custody, they were no better than the Empire they fought against. He didn't care about strategic considerations or resource allocation. Luke was his friend, and Han was going to get him back with or without Alliance support. Leia felt a surge of gratitude for Han's loyalty, even as she recognized the impossibility of his position. Han was a skilled pilot and a capable fighter, but he couldn't assault the Imperial Palace single-handedly. They needed a plan, not just passion. But what plan could possibly work against an enemy like Vader, who could sense deception through the Force and commanded the most powerful military in the galaxy? The solution came from an unexpected source. Lando Calrissian, former administrator of Cloud City and relatively new to the Alliance, proposed a different approach. Instead of trying to extract Luke by force, they should focus on making contact with him. Leia had the Force connection. Maybe she could use it to communicate, to coordinate something. If Luke could escape from within, create his own opportunity, the Alliance could position assets to pick him up. It would still be dangerous, but it wouldn't require a full military assault on Coruscant. The plan had merit, but it revealed another problem. Leia's Force abilities were largely untrained. She could sense Luke, could feel emotions through the Force, but she couldn't project thoughts or communicate complex information. She needed training, needed to develop her Force sensitivity into something useful. But with Luke captured and no other Jedi available, who could train her? The answer came in the form of a ghostly visitation. Obi-Wan Kenobi appeared to Leia as a Force spirit, visible only to her. He told her that Luke had begun her training, but she must continue on her own, with guidance from him and Yoda. The path of a Jedi was never easy, and it would be especially difficult for her, learning while actively fighting a war against her own father. But the Force was strong in her family, and she had the potential to become as powerful as Luke. perhaps even more so in certain areas. Yoda, when Leia traveled to Dagobah to meet him, was even more direct. The Force had been unbalanced for too long, he told her. Vader's rise to Emperor had created a concentration of dark side power unlike anything seen since the ancient Sith Empire. To combat this, the light side needed its own champions. Luke was one. Leia would be another, but her path would be different from the traditional Jedi way. She would not retreat from the world to meditate in temples. She would be a Jedi in the midst of conflict, fighting for justice while maintaining her connection to the light. The training was grueling. Yoda pushed Leia hard, teaching her Force techniques while also drilling home the philosophy and discipline required to be a Jedi. She learned to enhance her physical abilities, to sense danger before it struck, to influence weak minds, and to shield her thoughts from Force users who might try to read them. This last skill would be crucial if she ever faced Vader directly. He would try to sense her presence, to read her intentions. She needed to be able to hide her Force signature, to cloak herself in the Force. While Leia trained, the Alliance worked to rebuild its strength. New recruits flooded in from systems that feared Vader's more militaristic rule. Palpatine's empire had been oppressive, but it had also been bureaucratic and distant for many citizens. You could live your whole life on an outer rim world and never see an Imperial officer. Vader's empire seemed different, more actively intrusive, more demanding of complete submission. People who had tolerated Palpatine's regime found themselves unwilling to accept Vader's. The Alliance established new bases on remote worlds, spreading out to avoid giving the Empire a single target to strike. They recruited new pilots, trained new soldiers, and acquired new ships. Corporate interests that had quietly supported the Alliance under Palpatine now provided more open assistance, calculating that Vader's military efficiency would be bad for business. The Alliance also reached out to criminal organizations, some of which were threatened by Vader's crackdown on corruption and illegal activity. But for every gain, there were setbacks. Vader's supreme commanders were proven to be frighteningly effective. They coordinated Imperial operations with a precision that had been lacking under Palpatine's divided command structure. Alliance cells that might have survived through cleverness and exploitation of Imperial bureaucracy found themselves hunted down and eliminated by task forces that combined intelligence gathering, naval power, and ground assault in seamless operations. The Battle of Ord Mantell demonstrated the new reality. Alliance forces had established a significant presence on that world, using it as a recruiting hub and supply depot. Under Palpatine, such a base might have survived for months or even years before being discovered and attacked. Under Vader, it lasted less than 3 weeks. A task force led by Supreme Commander Piet jumped into the system, deployed ground forces with surgical precision, and crushed the Alliance presence before reinforcements could arrive. The Alliance lost thousands of soldiers and valuable supplies in a single afternoon. Mon Mothma realized they needed to change their strategy. The kind of conventional military campaigns they had been planning, culminating in the attack on Endor, wouldn't work against Vader's empire. They needed to return to their roots as a guerrilla movement, striking quickly and disappearing before Imperial forces could respond. They needed to target the Empire's supply lines, its communication networks, its economic infrastructure. They couldn't win through direct confrontation, so they would win by making the Empire's rule too costly to maintain. This shift in strategy was controversial. Some Alliance members had joined because they believed in the ideal of restoring the Republic through military victory. Returning to guerrilla tactics felt like admitting defeat, like acknowledging they couldn't actually beat the Empire in open battle. But pragmatists like General Medine and Admiral Akbar supported the change. They had seen what Vader's military reforms could do. Adapting their tactics wasn't defeat, it was survival, Vader's inner conflict. In the depths of Fortress Vader, in a meditation chamber built directly above the dark side Virgins, Emperor Vader grappled with something he rarely acknowledged: doubt. The dark side had always offered him clarity of purpose, a channel for his rage and pain. But as Emperor, as absolute ruler of the galaxy, he found himself facing questions that raw power couldn't answer. Questions that Anakin Skywalker, buried beneath years of hate and suffering, still whispered in the darkest corners of his mind. The Force showed him visions, as it often did in deep meditation. He saw Padme, beautiful and alive, looking at him with love untainted by fear or horror. He saw Luke, fighting at his side rather than against him, father and son, bring order to the chaos of the galaxy. He saw a new Sith Empire, stronger and more enduring than Palpatine's, ruled by the Skywalker bloodline for generations. These were the visions the dark side wanted him to see, the promises it made to keep him committed to his chosen path. But other visions intruded, uninvited and unwelcome. He saw his mother, Shmi, dying in his arms on Tatooine. He saw the Tusken Raiders he had slaughtered in his rage, men, women, and children cut down by a Jedi Knight who couldn't control his emotions. He saw the younglings in the Jedi Temple, their innocent faces turned toward him in confusion and fear before his lightsaber fell. He saw Padme on Mustafar clutching her throat as he force-choked her, his own paranoia and rage turning against the person he loved most in the galaxy. These visions were followed by a voice, soft and familiar. Ahsoka Tano, his former Padawan, spoke to him through the Force. She didn't appear visually, but her presence was unmistakable. She told him it wasn't too late, that Anakin Skywalker could still return. She reminded him of who he had been before the darkness consumed him. A hero, a defender of the innocent, a Jedi who had fought for justice even when it cost him personally. That man still existed, she insisted, buried beneath Vader's armor and hate, but not completely destroyed. Vader rejected the voice, pushing it away with a surge of dark side power. Ahsoka Tano had abandoned him years ago, had walked away from the Jedi Order and from her master. She had no right to judge him now, no authority to speak redemption. Anakin Skywalker was dead, killed by his own weaknesses and the Jedi's failures. Vader was what remained, stronger and more powerful, precisely because he had shed Anakin's sentimentality and self-doubt. But the voice persisted, softer now but still present. It asked him what he had truly gained. Power, yeah, control, certainly, but was he happy? Was he at peace? Or was he still driven by the same fear that had led him to the dark side in the first place? The terror of loss, the desperate need to control everything around him to prevent being hurt again. Vader had become Emperor, had claimed supreme power, but he was still a slave to his own fear and rage. The meditation session ended abruptly. Vader rose from his kneeling position, his cybernetic joint servos whining, and left the chamber. He couldn't afford these doubts, not now. He had an empire to rule, rebels to crush, a son to convert. There was no room for the kind of introspection that led to questioning his choices. The dark side demanded commitment, demanded absolute certainty. Doubt was weakness, and weakness was death. Yet the doubts persisted, manifesting in his dreams during those rare moments when he entered deep sleep. He dreamed of Padme, pregnant and beautiful, asking him why he had turned to the dark side. He dreamed of Obi-Wan on Mustafar, pleading with him to abandon this path before it destroyed him. He dreamed of himself as he once was, young and full of hope, before the years of war and manipulation had twisted him into something monstrous. These dreams disturbed him more than he cared to admit. The dark side was supposed to offer strength and clarity, to free him from attachments and moral complications. But instead, he found himself thinking constantly about the people he had lost: his mother, his wife, his best friend, his Padawan. Even his enemies seemed to haunt him. He had killed Count Dooku at Palpatine's command, and sometimes he wondered if the Count had known, in those final moments, that he was being discarded as just another tool. Would Vader suffer the same fate? Had he already begun down that path by killing Palpatine? The relationship with Luke became the focal point of this internal struggle. On one level, Vader wanted Luke as his apprentice purely for practical reasons. A powerful Force user at his side would strengthen his position and create a dynasty. But on a deeper level, one he barely acknowledged to himself, he wanted Luke's acceptance and forgiveness. He wanted his son to look at him without horror, to see not the monster, but the father who loved him. This desire was dangerously close to attachment, to sentiment, to the kind of weakness the dark side punished. During one of their evening sessions, Luke confronted him about this contradiction. "You claim to have embraced the dark side completely," Luke said, "but you haven't. You keep trying to convince me to join you. Why? If you were truly committed to Sith philosophy, you would simply try to break me through torture and pain, force me to embrace the dark side through suffering. But you don't. You talk to me. You try to convince me. That's not the Sith way. That's a father trying to connect with his son." Vader's response was immediate and harsh. "Do not presume to understand the Sith way, boy. I am converting you through the most powerful tool available, reason and truth. The Jedi lied to you about the nature of the Force, about power, about the galaxy itself. I am showing you reality, and reality will bring you to the dark side more surely than any torture." But Luke smiled, a sad, knowing expression that reminded Vader painfully of Padme. "You're lying to yourself. I can feel it through the Force. You want my love, not just my power. You want a family, not just an apprentice. But the dark side won't give you that. It can't. It only takes, never gives. You'll never have what you really want as long as you serve it." The words struck deeper than Vader wanted to admit. He ended the session abruptly, ordering guards to return Luke to his chambers. Alone in his throne room, Vader found himself staring at his reflection in the polished durasteel walls. The black armor, the death mask, the mechanical breathing, this was what the dark side had given him. Power beyond measure, but at the cost of everything that made life worth living. He had sacrificed his humanity to save Padme and had lost her anyway. He had embraced the dark side to gain power and had become a slave to it. He had killed Palpatine to claim freedom and had merely replaced one form of bondage with another. These thoughts were dangerous, corrosive to the certainty the dark side required. Vader forced them down, channeling his confusion and pain into anger. The anger became fuel, dark side energy that he could use to strengthen himself. This was the pattern he had followed for over 2 decades. Pain and doubt transformed into rage and power. It had sustained him through impossible battles, through the hunting of the Jedi, through years of service to Palpatine. It would sustain him now as Emperor, as Master of the Galaxy. But somewhere deep in Fortress Vader, in the meditation chamber above the dark side vergence, a small part of Anakin Skywalker remained, buried beneath years of hate and suffering, barely alive, but not quite dead. And that part was growing stronger, fed by Luke's presence and by the impossible situation Vader had created for himself. He had claimed supreme power, but in doing so, he had lost the one person who could give his life meaning. Palpatine had known this truth. Absolute power led to absolute isolation. The Emperor had been alone, feared by all, loved by none. Vader was following the same path, and some part of him recognized the futility of it. The conflict within him would have to be resolved one way or another. Either Vader would crush the last remnants of Anakin Skywalker permanently, becoming the perfect dark side entity the Sith philosophy demanded, or Anakin would resurface, redeemed through his son's love and faith. There could be no middle ground, no compromise between light and dark. The Force demanded balance, and Vader stood at the fulcrum point, pulled equally toward salvation and damnation. The new Imperial Order, 6 months into Emperor Vader's reign, the galaxy had settled into an uneasy new reality. The Empire functioned with a ruthless efficiency that had been lacking under Palpatine's rule. The corruption and infighting that had characterized the previous regime were largely eliminated, replaced by a military meritocracy where competence and results mattered more than political connections. For ordinary citizens in many systems, daily life improved in some unexpected ways, even as it became more oppressive in others. On Corellia, a major industrial world in the core worlds, the changes were particularly visible. Under Palpatine, the system's Moff had been a political appointee who cared more about enriching himself than actually governing. Factories operated at half capacity due to corruption and mismanagement. Workers lived in squalor, while the Moff and his cronies grew wealthy on bribes and embezzlement. Now, under Vader's appointed supreme commander for the region, those corrupt officials had been purged. The factories operated efficiently. And while the workers certainly weren't prospering, they at least received the wages they were promised and worked in safer conditions. This created a propaganda problem for the Rebel Alliance. How could they convince people that Vader's empire was worse than Palpatine's when, for many citizens, things were actually getting better? The Alliance's message had always been about freedom and justice, but those were abstract concepts. For a factory worker on Corellia who was finally being paid fairly, the promise of someday living in a restored republic seemed less important than the reality of putting food on the table today. Emperor Vader understood this dynamic and exploited it ruthlessly. His propaganda broadcasts emphasized order, stability, and prosperity through strength. He didn't promise democracy or freedom. He promised security and efficiency. He portrayed the Rebel Alliance not as freedom fighters, but as terrorists and criminals who threatened the stability that ordinary people depended on. In many systems, this message resonated particularly in the core worlds and the more developed regions of the Mid-Rim. The Force-centric nature of Vader's rule became increasingly apparent as his Imperial Knights graduated from their training and deployed across the galaxy. These Force warriors, clad in distinctive crimson and black armor that marked them as the Emperor's personal agents, served as both enforcers and symbols. A single Imperial Knight could be assigned to a sector fleet, serving as both an advisor to the Supreme Commander and a direct line to the Emperor's will. They could sense deception through the Force, making them excellent at rooting out corruption and treachery. They could inspire fear in ways that normal Imperial officers couldn't, their presence alone often enough to quell dissent. But the Imperial Knights also represented a shift in how the Empire understood the Force. Under Palpatine, the Force had been secret knowledge, something the general population knew about only through myths and legends. The Jedi were gone, and the only visible Force users were Vader and the Inquisitors, who operated in shadows. Now, Vader was making Force usage a visible part of Imperial authority. The Imperial Knights served openly, their Force powers a demonstration of the Empire's superiority. This created its own problems. On Force-sensitive populations like the Miraluka, who had maintained their own Force traditions for millennia, Vader's demand that all Force users either join the Imperial Knights or be executed sparked rebellions. The Miraluka saw their Force abilities as a connection to their cultural heritage, not as a military asset to be controlled by the Empire. When Imperial forces arrived to begin conscripting Force-sensitive Miraluka, the population resisted. The resulting conflict was brief and brutal, ending with the Miraluka homeworld under martial law and their Force traditions effectively destroyed. Such incidents provided fuel for the Rebel Alliance's propaganda efforts, but they also demonstrated the impossibility of resistance. Vader's empire would not tolerate independence or dissent. You could prosper within the empire's structure, could even improve your life by serving efficiently and loyally. But any attempt to exist outside that structure would be met with overwhelming force. The choice was submission or annihilation, and increasingly, citizens across the galaxy chose submission. On Mustafar, Fortress Vader had become the dark heart of this new order. The obsidian spire rising from the lava fields housed not just the Emperor's personal chambers, but also the headquarters of the Imperial Knights, advanced weapons research facilities, and a network of interrogation centers where suspected rebels and dissidents were brought for Force-enhanced questioning. The dark side vergence beneath the fortress amplified Vader's power, but it also seemed to spread a pall of oppression across the entire planet. Mustafarians who had survived the fortress's construction lived in constant fear, their world transformed into a monument to Sith power. The Emperor's routine became legendary among the Imperial hierarchy. He began each day with bacta immersion and meditations, emerging from his chambers with renewed strength and purpose. He then reviewed intelligence reports from across the galaxy, personally reading summaries from each Supreme Commander. Vader had an encyclopedic knowledge of Imperial military operations, could recall details of fleet compositions, and troop deployments across hundreds of systems. Subordinates who thought they could deceive him quickly discovered their error, often fatally. Afternoons were devoted to audiences and decisions. Supreme commanders reported via hologram, briefing the Emperor on their operations and seeking approval for major actions. Moffs presented economic reports and requests for resources. Imperial Knights returned from missions to deliver their findings and receive new assignments. Vader dispensed judgment swiftly, his decisions final and without appeal. Officers who failed him were replaced immediately. Those who succeeded received rewards and greater responsibilities. The evening sessions with Luke continued, though they evolved over time. Vader had realized that straightforward attempts at conversion weren't working. Luke's faith in the light side and his Jedi training ran too deep. So Vader changed his approach, becoming more subtle, more nuanced. He would discuss philosophy and politics without explicitly trying to turn Luke to the dark side. He would ask questions about justice and morality, forcing Luke to grapple with difficult ethical problems that had no easy answers. "Tell me, Luke," Vader might say during one of these sessions, "is it just to allow millions to live in poverty and suffering because intervening would violate their world's sovereignty? The Republic did this for 1,000 years. The Jedi stood by and allowed it. They claimed to serve justice, but they served only the powerful. I have ended slavery on 17 worlds in the past 6 months. I have purged corrupt officials who starve their populations. Is this evil, or is it justice?" Luke would struggle to answer, recognizing the kernels of truth in his father's words while rejecting the authoritarian methods. "Justice imposed through force isn't true justice," he might reply. "You've ended some suffering, but you've done it by creating a system where everyone lives in fear. That's not better, it's just different." Vader would counter, "Fear is honest. Fear is clear. The Republic system offered the illusion of choice, but the reality was oppression hidden behind democratic procedures. At least my subjects know where they stand. They know that if they obey, they will be protected. If they work efficiently, they will be rewarded. There is no corruption, no unfairness, no political maneuvering, only order." These conversations left Luke troubled. He couldn't accept his father's philosophy, but he also couldn't completely dismiss it. The Jedi and the Republic had failed in many ways. Vader's empire, for all its oppression, did seem to function more efficiently than the old system. But Luke clung to the fundamental belief that freedom mattered, that people should have choices even if they made bad ones, that fear-based order was ultimately unsustainable. He just struggled to articulate why, struggled to make his father understand that power and efficiency weren't the only values that mattered. The wider galaxy watched these developments with a mixture of fear, hope, and resignation. In the Outer Rim, where imperial control had always been tenuous, warlords and criminal syndicates found themselves facing a more aggressive empire than they had known under Palpatine. Vader's supreme commanders didn't just demand tribute and nominal allegiance. They demanded complete submission and active cooperation. Systems that had maintained independence through bribery or isolation found those strategies no longer worked. They either integrated into the empire fully or faced military conquest. The corporate sector, that collection of systems governed by business interests rather than traditional governments, underwent forced restructuring. Vader had no patience for corporate governance or the prioritization of profit over imperial interests. He sent imperial knights and military forces to the corporate sector with a simple message: corporations could continue operating and could even prosper, but they would do so under imperial oversight and in service to imperial goals. Boards of directors found themselves replaced by imperial appointees. CEOs who resisted disappeared, replaced by more compliant executives. This aggressive expansion and consolidation of power should have created opportunities for the Rebel Alliance, should have driven disaffected populations into their ranks. And to some extent, it did. But Vader's military efficiency meant that rebellions were crushed almost as quickly as they formed. The Alliance tried to support uprisings on a dozen worlds, providing weapons and training to local insurgents. But without the bureaucratic dysfunction that had allowed such rebellions to survive under Palpatine, most were eliminated within weeks. The Rebel Alliance found itself in an increasingly desperate situation. They had bases, they had forces, they had dedicated fighters willing to die for the cause of freedom. But they were losing ground strategically, unable to hold territory or achieve significant victories against an empire that seemed to grow stronger each month. Mon Mothma and the Alliance Council recognized that they needed something dramatic, something that would shake the Empire's foundations and remind the galaxy that resistance was still possible. That something would have to involve Luke Skywalker, the last Jedi, imprisoned in the heart of the Empire. But how to reach him, how to turn his captivity into an advantage, remained an unanswered question that haunted the rebellion's leadership as Emperor Vader's new order solidified its grip on the galaxy. 1 year into his reign, Emperor Vader launched what he called the Unification Campaign, a systematic military operation designed to eliminate the Rebel Alliance once and for all. Unlike Palpatine's approach of reactive suppression and political maneuvering, Vader planned to destroy the rebellion through coordinated military action that would leave them nowhere to hide and no resources to sustain their resistance. The campaign began with a comprehensive intelligence operation. Vader deployed his Imperial Knights across the galaxy, using their Force abilities to sense rebel sympathizers and detect hidden bases. Traditional intelligence gathering methods were enhanced by Force-assisted interrogation techniques that were frighteningly effective. Rebels who had been able to resist conventional questioning found themselves unable to shield their thoughts from Force users skilled in mental probing. The rebellion's network of safe houses, supply caches, and sympathetic contacts began to unravel as location after location was exposed and raided. Supreme Commander Piet, leading the Core Worlds campaign, demonstrated the new Imperial efficiency in action. Intelligence indicated a major rebel supply depot on Thifera, the source of Bacta, that was crucial for treating wounded Alliance soldiers. Rather than a straightforward assault that would alert the rebels and allow them to evacuate, Piet orchestrated a multi-pronged operation. Imperial agents sabotaged the depot's communications. Naval forces blockaded the system from hyperspace approach routes. Ground forces, supported by Imperial Knights, swept through the facility in a coordinated strike that left the rebels no time to organize resistance. The depot fell in less than 4 hours. Thousands of tons of medical supplies were captured. More importantly, the financial records seized in the raid revealed a network of corporate sponsors who had been secretly funding the alliance. Vader personally reviewed these records, then ordered immediate action. The CEOs of 17 corporations found themselves arrested and charged with treason. Their assets were seized, their companies restructured under imperial control. The message was clear: supporting the rebellion, even indirectly, would result in complete destruction. This aggressive approach terrified potential rebel supporters throughout the galaxy. Under Palpatine, one could often provide quiet support to the Alliance while maintaining plausible deniability. The bureaucratic nature of the old Empire meant investigations moved slowly. Evidence could be buried, and political connections provided protection. Under Vader, there was no bureaucratic shield, no political protection, no slow-moving investigation. Imperial knights appeared without warning, sensed deception through the Force, and arrests followed immediately. Corporate leaders, planetary governors, even some Moffs who had been playing both sides found themselves facing summary execution. The Rebel Alliance tried to adapt. They abandoned fixed bases in favor of mobile fleet operations. They dispersed their forces across countless systems, making it harder for the Empire to strike decisive blows. They adopted even more stringent security procedures, compartmentalizing information so that captured operatives couldn't reveal too much under interrogation. But every adaptation seemed to be anticipated by Imperial intelligence. Vader's experience hunting Jedi was being applied to hunting rebels, and the results were devastating. The Battle of Bothawui demonstrated the scope of Vader's strategic planning. The Bothans, a species known for their intelligence networks, had been crucial Alliance supporters. Their spy net had provided much of the intelligence that had allowed the rebellion to survive and occasionally strike back at the Empire. Vader decided to eliminate this advantage permanently. He ordered a 3-sector operation that would draw rebel forces into a trap while simultaneously crushing the Bothan resistance. The operation began with leaked intelligence suggesting that an Imperial convoy carrying Kyber crystals would pass through the Bothawui system. The intelligence was carefully crafted to be credible, but not too obvious, salted with just enough accurate information to pass Alliance verification procedures. The Alliance leadership, recognizing the value of Kyber crystals for their cause and eager for a victory after months of setbacks, committed significant forces to raid the convoy. Admiral Akbar smelled a trap and counseled against the operation, but he was overruled. The Alliance needed a win, needed to show the galaxy and their own supporters that they could still strike at the Empire. The raiding force, comprising a significant portion of the Alliance's remaining capital ships, jumped into the Bothawui system, ready for battle. What they found waiting was not a lightly defended convoy, but Death Squadron itself. Vader's personal fleet, led by the Executor. The ambush was comprehensive. The moment Alliance ships reverted from hyperspace, gravity well generators activated, preventing retreat. Imperial Star Destroyers, positioned in pre-calculated firing solutions, unleashed immediate barrages. TIE fighters, held in reserve, swarmed the rebel starfighters. On the surface of Bothawui, Imperial ground forces that had been secretly deployed began assaulting rebel installations and Bothan intelligence centers. The Alliance forces fought desperately, showing the courage and skill that had sustained them through years of warfare. Rebel pilots achieved kill ratios that would have been impressive in any other context. Alliance capital ships focused fire, destroying several Imperial vessels, but they were outnumbered, outgunned, and caught in a killing zone designed by one of the galaxy's greatest military minds. Ship after ship fell to Imperial fire or was disabled and boarded. Admiral Akbar, commanding from Home One, made the impossible decision to abandon the battle. He ordered all ships capable of jumping to hyperspace to do so immediately, leaving the others to cover the retreat. It was a tactical necessity that felt like betrayal. Thousands of Alliance personnel died or were captured as their ships were overwhelmed, but Akbar's decision saved the fleet from complete annihilation. Enough ships escaped that the Alliance could continue fighting, though their naval power was now severely diminished. Vader stood in the Executor's command bridge, watching the fleeing rebel ships disappear into hyperspace. He could have pursued, could have continued the slaughter, but he had achieved his objectives. The Alliance fleet was crippled, unable to mount major operations for months. The Bothan intelligence network was destroyed, its key operatives dead or captured. And the psychological impact of the defeat would reverberate through Alliance ranks, sowing doubt and fear. Let them run, he thought. Let them scatter and hide. It would make the final hunt all the more satisfying. But victory at Bothawi came with unexpected complications. In the aftermath of the battle, while Imperial forces were securing the system and processing prisoners, Leia Organa led a small strike team in a desperate gambit. While the Empire's attention was focused on military operations, she infiltrated the Imperial Detention Center where captured rebels were being held, using her Force abilities to mask her presence and her intelligence contacts to navigate Imperial security. The operation was suicide, nearly impossible, and succeeded only because of luck and Leia's growing Force powers. She rescued 57 captured rebels, including several key intelligence operatives who knew crucial details about Alliance operations. But more importantly, she demonstrated that the Alliance still had heroes willing to risk everything, still had Force users who could challenge Imperial power. The story of her raid spread quickly through rebel networks, becoming a desperately needed morale boost. Princess Leia, Jedi Knight in training, had struck the Empire at its moment of victory and emerged triumphant. Vader felt her presence during the raid, sensed through the Force the signature of his daughter engaging in combat with Imperial Knights sent to stop her. He could have intervened personally, could have captured Leia as he had Luke, but something stayed his hand. Perhaps it was strategic calculation. Having both children in captivity might force them to desperate measures. Perhaps it was a reluctance to confront his daughter, to face another reminder of what he had lost when Padme died. Whatever the reason, he allowed Leia to escape, though he positioned forces to harass her retreat and make her pay for her success. The military campaign continued across dozens of sectors. Imperial forces, coordinated through supreme commanders who reported directly to Vader, systematically hunted rebel cells. The Alliance was being bled, losing personnel and resources faster than they could replace them. Each month brought new defeats, new setbacks. The bright hope of Yavin and Hoth seemed like ancient history. Now the Alliance fought not for victory, but for survival, trying to preserve themselves long enough for some opportunity. some miracle, to shift the balance. That miracle would have to come from within the Empire itself, from the cracks beginning to show in Vader's seemingly perfect military machine. Because while the Emperor's military efficiency was undeniable, his political control was not absolute, and ambitious men had begun to see opportunities in the new order. Political intrigue and internal threats. Emperor Vader's reforms had created winners and losers within the imperial hierarchy. The military professionals who rose through merit and competence thrived in the new system. But political appointees, aristocrats who had relied on family connections, and bureaucrats skilled in manipulation rather than administration found themselves sidelined or eliminated. These displaced power brokers didn't simply accept their reduced status. They began plotting, scheming, looking for ways to either regain influence or destroy the system that had rejected them. Grand Moff Artus Kane controlled a vast oversector in the Outer Rim, commanding significant military resources and economic power. Under Palpatine, Kane had been a master political operator, playing factions against each other, accumulating wealth and influence through clever maneuvering. Under Vader, his skills became liabilities. The Emperor had no patience for political games. He wanted results. Systems secured, resources delivered, rebels eliminated. Kane delivered, but he resented the reduction of his autonomy. He had been a near-independent ruler under the old system. Now he was just another administrator expected to follow orders without question. Kane began quietly reaching out to other Moffs who shared his frustrations. He was careful, using intermediaries and coded communications, aware that Vader's Imperial Knights might sense treachery through the Force. His pitch was simple. They had helped build the Empire, had maintained order during the transition from Republic to Imperial rule. They deserved respect and autonomy. Vader treated them like mid-level managers, replaceable cogs in his military machine. It was time to remind the Emperor that political power still mattered, that he needed their support to maintain control over the vast territories they governed. The conspiracy grew slowly, carefully. Kane recruited 7 other Moffs and 2 Grand Moffs, creating a cabal that controlled nearly a third of Imperial space. They didn't plan to directly overthrow Vader. They weren't that foolish. But they did plan to create conditions that would force the Emperor to negotiate, to grant them greater autonomy and respect in exchange for their continued loyalty. They would coordinate a series of administrative failures, allow rebel activity to increase in their territories, slow the flow of resources to Vader's military machine. Nothing overt enough to be considered treason, but enough to demonstrate that the Empire needed its political class, not just its military commanders. What they didn't account for was Emperor Vader's personal involvement in governance. Where Palpatine had delegated most administrative oversight to underlings, Vader personally reviewed intelligence reports and operational summaries. He noticed patterns in the data, increased rebel activity in certain sectors, delayed resource shipments, communications breakdowns that seemed too frequent to be coincidental. He began cross-referencing these anomalies with the personnel records of the Moffs governing those regions. The pattern became clear. The same 8 Moffs and 2 Grand Moffs appeared repeatedly in connection with suspicious activities. Vader didn't immediately move against them. Instead, he deployed Imperial Knights to observe these officials. to monitor their communications and sense their intentions through the Force. Within weeks, the conspiracy was exposed in detail: who was involved, what they planned, how they coordinated their efforts. Vader's response was calculated and devastating. Rather than arrest all the conspirators simultaneously, he began with the outer ring, the lesser participants. Moff Thorius, who governed a small but wealthy sector in the Mid-Rim, disappeared one night from his personal quarters. His security reported that Lord Vader himself had arrived via shuttle, entered Thorius's chambers, and departed an hour later. Thorius was never seen again. No charges were filed, no public announcement made. He simply ceased to exist. This vanishing sent shock waves through the conspiracy. If Vader knew about Thorius, did he know about all of them? Should they scatter, try to flee Imperial space? Should they accelerate their plans, launch their political offensive before Vader eliminated them all? Or should they wait, hope that Thorius's disappearance was coincidental, unrelated to their plotting? Caney made the decision. They would accelerate, would implement their plans immediately. Across their territories, they would slow Imperial operations, allow rebel activity to surge, create chaos that would force Vader to negotiate. It was a desperate gamble, but better than waiting passively to be eliminated. The orders went out through their secure networks, encrypted and compartmentalized. Within days, the effects became visible across a third of the Empire. Vader let it happen. He watched as resource shipments were delayed, as rebel cells conducted unopposed raids, as administrative inefficiencies multiplied across multiple sectors. He allowed the conspirators to believe their plan was working, that they were successfully demonstrating their importance. Then, 3 weeks into their political offensive, he struck. Operation Purge began at midnight, coordinated across dozens of star systems. Imperial Knights, working with loyal military forces, simultaneously arrested every member of the conspiracy. There was no trial, no public spectacle. The conspirators were brought before Emperor Vader in private sessions, allowed to confess their crimes, then executed. Their families were spared but stripped of titles and wealth. Their territories were reorganized under new governors, selected for competence and loyalty rather than political connections. The entire operation, from first arrests to final executions, took less than a week. The efficiency was terrifying. The message was clear. Political intrigue would not be tolerated in Vader's empire. Competence and loyalty were the only paths to power. Attempting to manipulate or undermine the Emperor would result in swift and absolute destruction. But the Purge created its own problems. Caney had been correct about one thing. The Empire needed its political class to function. Moffs and governors might not be military commanders, but they performed crucial administrative functions. They understood local politics, managed economic systems, negotiated with corporate interests. Replacing experienced politicians with military officers didn't automatically solve these problems. In the Noonian sector, former Grand Moff Caney's replacement, General Rovan, discovered this reality painfully. Rovan was an excellent military commander, but had no experience with civil administration. Within months, the sector's economy was in crisis. Tax collection dropped as Rovan's heavy-handed enforcement drove businesses underground. Local populations that had been managed through careful political balancing by Caney erupted in protests and small rebellions under Rovan's inflexible rule. The sector's industrial output, which had been one of the highest in the Empire, plummeted. Vader observed this decline with frustration. He had wanted to eliminate political corruption and inefficiency, not destroy the Empire's economic foundations. But he couldn't simply restore the old system. That would undermine the message he had sent with the Purge. Instead, he adapted. He established the Imperial Administrative Academy, training civilian administrators who understood both governance and imperial values. He allowed military commanders like Rovan to partner with these administrators, splitting political and military authority. It was imperfect, but it began addressing the gap left by the Purge. Meanwhile, deeper plots were forming in places Vader couldn't easily reach. In the unknown regions, Imperial remnants who had fled after the Battle of Endor in the original timeline now saw opportunity in Vader's reign. They had expected the Empire to fracture, creating room for their own power bases. Instead, Vader had consolidated control. But his focus on military efficiency and his harsh treatment of political operators created potential allies among those who felt displaced or threatened. These remnants made contact with disaffected Imperial officers, with corporate leaders whose businesses had been seized, with Moffs who feared they might be next on Vader's purge list. They offered an alternative vision, an empire that balanced military strength with political stability, that allowed for regional autonomy while maintaining overall unity. They weren't strong enough to challenge Vader directly, but they could position themselves as a government in waiting, ready to step in if and when the Emperor's regime collapsed. Vader was vaguely aware of these movements in the unknown regions, but they seemed like distant concerns compared to the immediate threat of the Rebel Alliance and the challenges of governing the known galaxy. He deployed forces to patrol the border regions, established monitoring stations, made it clear that Imperial space was not to be violated, but he couldn't project power into the unknown regions the way he could in Imperial space. That would require a different kind of campaign, one he wasn't prepared to launch while still fighting the Alliance. This left a power vacuum that would eventually have consequences, but for now, Vader's attention remained focused inward on consolidating his control, crushing the rebellion, and attempting to convert his son to the dark side. Each of these goals was proven more difficult than he had anticipated, and the strain of maintaining absolute control was beginning to show. The ultimate confrontation, the confrontation that would decide the fate of the galaxy, began not with military campaigns or political machinations, but with the Force, vision. Both Luke Skywalker, imprisoned on Coruscant, and Leia Organa, leading Alliance operations from a hidden base, experienced the same vision simultaneously. They saw Mustafar. They saw Fortress Vader. They saw themselves standing together, facing their father. The vision showed no outcome, no resolution, only the moment of confrontation. But both twins understood. This was their destiny, the convergence of light and dark that would determine the future. Luke had spent more than a year in Imperial custody, subjected to his father's relentless attempts at conversion. The experience had changed him, deepened his understanding of the dark side's temptations and the light side's challenges. He hadn't fallen, hadn't embraced Vader's philosophy, but he had learned. He understood now that the Jedi's way wasn't simply opposition to the dark side, but a positive affirmation of compassion, selflessness, and connection to all life. He had become a Jedi not through formal training, but through choosing the light even when the dark offered easier paths. Leia had undergone her own transformation. Her training with Yoda and Obi-Wan's Force spirit had given her skills the old Jedi would have taken years to develop. But more than that, it had given her a perspective on the Force that combined Jedi wisdom with practical leadership. She was a warrior and a diplomat, a Force user and a political leader. She was what the Jedi should have been, engaged with the world, fighting for justice, but maintaining the inner peace and connection to the Force that prevented corruption. When the vision came, both twins knew what had to happen. They needed to confront Vader together, to present him with a choice, not through violence, not through Force combat, but through the power of family, of love, of the light side in its purest form. They would offer him redemption one final time. And if he refused, if he chose power over love, then they would do what the Force required, stop him, even if it meant his death. Coordinating the mission was extraordinarily difficult. Luke was in the heart of the Imperial Palace, surrounded by guards and under constant surveillance. Leia would have to infiltrate Coruscant, extract Luke without alerting Imperial forces, and then both of them would need to travel to Mustafar. Every step seemed impossible, but the Force vision had been clear. This confrontation was meant to happen, was necessary for balance. The Force itself would create opportunities if they were brave enough to seize them. The opportunity came during a state visit Vader was making to an important industrial world. The Emperor would be off Coruscant for 3 days, accompanied by a reduced security detail. Luke would remain on the capital, guarded by regular stormtroopers rather than Imperial knights. Leia and a small Alliance strike team would infiltrate the palace, extract Luke, and escape before Vader returned. It would require perfect timing, incredible luck, and Force abilities pushed to their limits. In other words, exactly the kind of impossible mission that seemed to be the rebellion's specialty. The infiltration succeeded through a combination of Alliance planning and Leia's Force abilities. She used Force persuasion to bypass security checkpoints, Force concealment to hide from patrols, and her growing precognitive sense to avoid dead ends and traps. When they reached Luke's chambers, she found him ready, having sensed her approach through their Force bond. Together, they fought their way out of the palace, their complementary skills, Luke's offensive power and Leia's subtle manipulation, creating a devastating combination. They escaped Coruscant on a stolen Imperial shuttle modified by Alliance techs to avoid standard tracking protocols. Vader sensed the disturbance in the Force while presiding over the dedication ceremony for a new Star Destroyer. His son was gone. Liberated by his daughter, he should have felt rage, should have ordered immediate pursuit, but instead he felt something different: anticipation. The vision he had suppressed, the call he had ignored, suddenly became clear. This was the confrontation he had been avoiding and desiring simultaneously. His children were coming to Mustafar, coming to offer him redemption or death. He would give them neither. Vader returned to Fortress Vader and waited. He made no attempt to intercept Luke and Leia in transit, didn't order his supreme commanders to establish blockades or tracking nets. He wanted this confrontation to happen on his terms, in his seat of power, where the dark side vergence amplified his abilities. He would show his children the true nature of power, would demonstrate why the Emperor of the galaxy could not be challenged or changed. And when they submitted, when they finally understood his strength, they would join him. Together, the Skywalker family would rule the galaxy for generations. Luke and Leia arrived on Mustafar with only a small support team. Han Solo, Chewbacca, and a handful of Alliance commandos established a perimeter while the twins entered Fortress Vader. The obsidian spire rose before them, malevolent energy radiating from its foundation. They could feel the dark side vergence, could sense their father's presence within, waiting. They ignited their lightsabers, Luke's green blade and Leia's blue one creating points of light against the fortress's darkness, and entered. The interior of Fortress Vader was a maze of corridors and chambers, but the twins didn't need maps. The Force guided them, drawing them toward the meditation chamber at the fortress's heart. They encountered no guards, no Imperial knights, no resistance. Vader had ordered the fortress evacuated, leaving only himself and his children. This would be a family matter, settled without interference. In the meditation chamber, directly above the dark side vergence, Emperor Vader awaited them on a simple throne. He had removed his helmet, exposing the scarred, pale flesh of Anakin Skywalker's face. His breathing, usually mechanically regulated by his armor, came ragged and painful. This was an act of vulnerability, of trust perhaps, or of demonstration. He was showing them what the dark side had cost him, what he had sacrificed, and what he had gained in return. "My children," he said, his natural voice hoarse and damaged, "you have come to save me. How touching. But I need no salvation. I am the most powerful being in the galaxy. I have brought order from chaos, strength from weakness. I am what the Jedi should have been, what my own master failed to become. I am free." Luke stepped forward, tears streaming down his face at the sight of his father's ruined features. "You're not free. You're a slave to fear, to pain, to the dark side. Father, I know there's still good in you. I've felt it. Anakin Skywalker is not dead. He's trapped, suffering, crying out for release. Let us help you. Come back to the light. It's not too late." Leia added, "We felt our mother through the Force, in visions and dreams. Padme Amidala believed in you. She died believing you could be saved. Honor her memory, honor her love. Choose light over darkness, choose family over power." Vader rose from his throne, Force energy crackling around him. Padme died because of Jedi weakness, because of their limitations. If I had fully embraced the dark side earlier, if I had claimed my power without hesitation, I could have saved her. I learned that lesson too late, but I will not make the same mistake again. Join me, both of you. Together, we will reshape the galaxy. We will create order that lasts not years, but millennia. The Skywalker dynasty will bring peace through strength. The twins activated their lightsabers simultaneously, not in attack, but in defense. They were prepared to die rather than join Vader's dark vision. They stood together, united in the light, facing the darkness their father represented. What followed was not a battle, but a transformation. Vader attacked, his red lightsaber cutting through the air with lethal precision. But Luke and Leia didn't simply defend. They reached out through the Force, not with aggression, but with love. They showed Vader memories of Padme, of his mother, of moments when Anakin Skywalker had been a hero. They projected feelings of compassion, of forgiveness, of unshakable faith in his capacity for redemption. The dark side vergence raged around them, feeding Vader's power, but the light side had its own strength, drawn from the unbreakable bond between the twins, from their love for their father despite his crimes. The meditation chamber became a battlefield of ideology more than physical combat. Darkness and light clashed in waves of force energy that shook the fortress's foundations. Vader felt himself weakening, not physically. The dark side was giving him strength beyond anything he had experienced. But emotionally, spiritually, he was fracturing. The love his children offered, the memories they evoked, the vision of what he could be if he returned to the light, it was poison to the dark side's certainty. Doubt crept in, the very weakness the dark side punished most severely. And in that moment of doubt, of weakness, Anakin Skywalker began to emerge. Not the confident Jedi Knight of the Clone Wars, but something new. A man who had experienced the depths of darkness and was choosing consciously and deliberately to return to the light. The transformation was agony. The dark side fought to maintain its hold, sending waves of pain through his damaged body. But Luke and Leia's presence in the Force sustained him, gave him strength to push through. Vader's lightsaber fell from his hand. He dropped to his knees, gasping, tears flowing from his ruined eyes. And in that moment, the Emperor was no more. Only Anakin Skywalker remained, broken, scarred, but redeemed. Long-term consequences and legacy. The redemption of Anakin Skywalker sent shockwaves through the Force that every sensitive being in the galaxy felt. On distant worlds, Force users who had hidden their abilities for years suddenly sensed a shift in the cosmic balance. The oppressive darkness that had pressed down on the galaxy for decades lifted, replaced by something more complex. Not pure light, but a mingling of light and dark that approached true balance. On Coruscant, the Imperial ruling council found itself in chaos. Emperor Vader had disappeared from all communication channels. The Supreme Commanders, accustomed to daily briefings and constant oversight, suddenly operated without clear direction. Some assumed a rebel attack had killed the Emperor. Others suspected internal coup. None knew the truth, that Vader lived but was no longer the Dark Lord who had ruled them with absolute authority. Anakin Skywalker emerged from Fortress Vader, supported by his children, his physical body failing, but his spirit stronger than it had been in decades. He knew he didn't have long to live. The combination of his injuries from Mustafar, the years of dependence on his suit's life support, and the terrible toll of his transformation back to the light side had broken his body beyond repair. But he had enough time to set things right, to use his remaining authority to create a path toward justice. His first act was to contact Grand Admiral Thrawn, who had recently returned from the unknown regions. Thrawn was perhaps the Empire's most brilliant military mind and, importantly, was not a Force user or ideologue, but a pragmatist who served the concept of order rather than any particular regime. Anakin appointed Thrawn as emergency military commander, authorized to coordinate Imperial forces during the transition period. Then he issued a proclamation that stunned the galaxy. Emperor Vader, now revealed to be Anakin Skywalker, the Jedi Knight who had fallen to the dark side, publicly confessed his crimes. Every atrocity from the destruction of the Jedi Temple to the hunting of survivors, from the torture of rebel prisoners to the unjust executions of imperial officials. He took full responsibility, acknowledging that his actions could never be forgiven or justified, and he announced his abdication, dissolving the empire and calling for the formation of a provisional government that would represent all the galaxy's peoples. The announcement created unprecedented chaos. Some imperial officers refused to believe it, insisting it was a rebel trick. Others saw opportunity for their own power grabs. A few, moved by Anakin's confession or simply exhausted by years of war, began reaching out to the Alliance to discuss terms of surrender. The galaxy teetered on the edge of complete anarchy, saved only by Thrawn's steady hand maintaining military discipline and by the Alliance's careful navigation of an impossible political situation. Mon Mothma and the Alliance leadership faced an extraordinary decision. They had spent years fighting against the Empire, had lost countless lives to Imperial brutality. Now, the Emperor was offering them exactly what they wanted: the dissolution of Imperial authority, a chance to rebuild the Republic. But accepting Anakin's surrender felt wrong somehow, incomplete. He had committed atrocities that demanded justice, not just abdication. Yet Leia, speaking on behalf of both herself and Luke, argued for restraint. Anakin Skywalker was dying, would be dead within days or weeks. He had returned to the light, had made the difficult choice to reject power in favor of redemption. Putting him on trial for war crimes would serve no purpose except revenge. Better to focus on building the future than punishing the past. The Alliance Council, after furious debate, accepted her recommendation. The transition from Empire to New Republic took years and was far from smooth. Grand Admiral Thrawn, true to Anakin's final orders, coordinated an Imperial withdrawal from contested territories while maintaining order in the core worlds. The military structure Vader had built proved remarkably adaptable, capable of operating as a peacekeeping force rather than an occupying army under Thrawn's leadership. Many Imperial officers who had chafed under Vader's authoritarian rule now found purpose in stabilizing systems during the transition. But other Imperial officers rejected the new order entirely. The warlords of the unknown regions, who had been positioning themselves for a power grab, launched attacks on weakened Imperial positions. They claimed to be preserving the true Empire against those who had betrayed Emperor Vader's legacy. These Imperial remnants would fight on for years, creating pockets of conflict that prevented the New Republic from achieving complete peace. Anakin Skywalker lived for 3 months after his redemption, long enough to see the foundations of the New Republic established and to meet with delegations from across the galaxy who sought his testimony and wisdom. He spent most of this time in medical care, his body finally given out after decades of mechanical support and dark side sustenance. Luke and Leia stayed with him constantly, learning what they could of their father's life, trying to understand the man he had been before darkness consumed him. When Anakin finally died, the twins were at his bedside. His last words were an apology to them, to Padme, to everyone he had hurt, and then he was gone, his Force presence dissolving into the cosmic energy that surrounded all things. But unlike many who died, Anakin didn't simply fade. Through the teaching of Obi-Wan and Yoda, he had learned the technique of becoming one with the Force while maintaining his consciousness. He appeared to his children as a Force ghost, finally free of the mechanical prison that had been his body, able to guide and advise them as they helped shape the new republic. The new republic that emerged from the Empire's ashes was fundamentally different from both the old republic and Vader's empire. It incorporated lessons from both systems, the democratic principles of the republic balanced with the military efficiency Vader had implemented. Mon Mothma became chief of state, presiding over a Senate that had real power but was balanced by military and judicial councils that prevented the kind of corruption and inefficiency that had doomed the old republic. Luke Skywalker, now a true Jedi Master, began rebuilding the Jedi Order, but the new order was different from the old. Luke incorporated his father's criticisms alongside Jedi wisdom. The new Jedi would not be detached from the world, but engaged with it. They would serve as peacekeepers and advisors, but they would also have families, would form attachments, would understand that love and compassion were strengths, not weaknesses. The Jedi Code was rewritten to emphasize balance rather than absolute rejection of emotions. Leia Organa became the new Republic's Minister of Defense and later its Chancellor, bringing together her political skills and her Force abilities to guide the government through its early tumultuous years. She married Han Solo, creating a bridge between the political establishment and the more independent-minded citizens who had supported the rebellion. Their children would grow up in a galaxy at peace, learning both politics and the Force, representing a new generation that had never known imperial tyranny. The Imperial Knights, Vader's creation, presented a unique challenge. Many of them had embraced the dark side, had become extensions of Vader's will, but some recognized, especially after Anakin's redemption, that they had been misled. Luke worked with these redeemed Force users, helping them find a place in the new order. Their combat skills and discipline, combined with a renewed commitment to the light side, created a unique branch of the Jedi. Warriors who had experienced darkness and chosen light, who could help others resist temptation because they understood its power. The galaxy that emerged from Emperor Vader's year-long reign was scarred, but ultimately stronger. The Empire's efficiency had eliminated much of the corruption and inefficiency that plagued the old Republic. Vader's meritocratic reforms, stripped of their authoritarian context, became the foundation for a more functional government. Systems that had been oppressed under both the Republic and the Empire now had real representation and autonomy. The horrors of imperial rule served as a constant reminder of what happened when fear and power went unchecked. Historians would debate for generations whether Vader's brief rule had been necessary, whether his path to redemption required him to first embrace ultimate darkness. Some argued that without experiencing absolute power, Anakin Skywalker could never have truly understood why it must be rejected. Others insisted that the cost, the lives lost, the suffering inflicted, could never be justified. But all agreed that the galaxy that emerged from his reign, shaped by his children and guided by the lessons learned from both his fall and redemption, represented something new and hopeful. Mustafar itself underwent transformation. The dark side virgins beneath Fortress Vader didn't disappear, but Luke and Leia worked together to balance it, establishing a light side presence on the world. Fortress Vader was not destroyed, but converted into a memorial and a school. Force sensitives from across the galaxy came there to learn about both light and dark, to understand the temptations of power and the strength of compassion. The fortress that had been a monument to tyranny became a symbol of redemption and balance. The legacy of Emperor Vader would be complex, multifaceted, and endlessly analyzed. He was a tyrant who had improved administrative efficiency while crushing freedom, a military genius who had brought order through fear, a father who had attempted to corrupt his children while simultaneously being saved by them, a Sith Lord who had returned to the light, proven that no one was beyond redemption. The galaxy he had briefly ruled would never forget him, would never stop arguing about whether his reign had been necessary or whether his redemption made him a hero or just a monster who had one moment of grace. But for Luke and Leia, the answer was simpler. Anakin Skywalker had been their father, flawed and terrible, and ultimately redeemed. His story was a warning about the seductive nature of power and a testament to the transformative power of love. They would carry that lesson forward, would teach it to future generations, would ensure that the galaxy remembered both what Darth Vader had done and what Anakin Skywalker had finally chosen. The stars wheeled overhead as they always had, indifferent to the dramas and tragedies of the beings who lived beneath them. But in the Force, in the cosmic energy that connected all living things, balance had been restored. Not perfect balance, not permanent balance, but balance enough. Light and dark in eternal dance, neither dominating, both necessary. And in that balance, the galaxy found peace. And so our journey through this alternate timeline comes to an end. We've explored what might have happened if Darth Vader had seized power instead of finding redemption, if the Dark Lord had become emperor rather than dying a redeemed hero. We've seen how his military genius and force power would have reshaped the Empire, how the Rebel Alliance would have struggled against a more efficient and direct tyranny, and how ultimately the love of his children would still have brought him back to the light. It's a reminder that in Star Wars, as in life, power corrupts, but love redeems. That the path to darkness may seem easier, but the path to light is ultimately more fulfilling. That no one is beyond salvation, no choice is final, and that family bonds can transcend even the deepest darkness. If you enjoyed this exploration of one of the galaxy's darkest what-ifs, consider liking this video and subscribing to the channel. We delve deep into Star Wars lore here, from the ancient Sith to the rise of the First Order, from legends to canon, always asking the difficult questions and exploring the roads not taken. May the Force be with you always.